Hi everyone, my name is Brittany J. Jones. In this video, I'm going to be sewing along to the new McCall's pattern. The number is 8322 and I'm going to be following along with view C on this pattern. This dress is really cute. It's perfect for spring and summer. I absolutely love the tuck details on it. So without further ado, let's go over the pattern pieces that we're going to need to cut out for view C on this pattern. Again, we're going to be making McCall's 8322. I'm going to be following along with view C on this pattern. If you have any questions concerning which fabrics would work great for this dress, on the back of the pattern envelope, there is a list of suggested fabrics right here. You will also need interfacing for this dress as well as one 12-inch invisible zipper. Be sure after you have taken your body measurements to check out the finished garment measurements and cut your dress out based off these measurements. Let's go ahead and review the pattern pieces that we're going to need to cut out for view C. We will need pattern piece number 2. This is the bodice back. We need to cut 4. Pattern piece number 4. This is the midriff front. We need to cut 2 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. Pattern piece number 5. This is the midriff back. We need to cut 4 from fabric and 2 from interfacing. Pattern piece number 6. This is the skirt front. We need to cut 1 on the fold. Pattern piece number 7, this is the skirt back. We need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 8, this is the bodice front. We need to cut 4. Pattern piece 9, this is the shoulder strap. We need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 10, this is the skirt front. We need to cut 1 on the fold, and be sure to pay attention to your instructions in your cutting layout. This is cut on the fold along the crosswise. So definitely pay attention to your cutting layout when you are cutting out this pattern. The last pattern piece to cut out is pattern piece number 11. This is the skirt back. We need to cut 2. Once you've cut out all of your fabric and you've transferred your markings, let's get started. To begin, the first thing that we're going to do is taking our bodice front and back. We're going to match up our side seams and pin in place. Match up your notches, the notches of your bottom piece. Make sure that you have the notches also of your pattern piece facing down. Just double check that. Match up the notches on the side and pin in place. You're going to do this for the fabric pieces as well as for the lining pieces. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin all of them. We're going to stitch all sides at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have sewn the side seams of our front and back together, you want to go ahead and press it flat. So I've done that for all 4 of mine, but I have 2 here. Next, we're going to go ahead and put the bodice front and back to the side and start to work on the ties. So grabbing your tie piece with the right sides facing, we're going to fold it together. So fold it in half like so. And then we're going to stitch in a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance down the long edge. Then you can trim down your seam and flip it right side out. Once you have your strap turned right side out, you can go ahead and give it a press. Now that we have the strap pressed, we're going to grab one of our front pieces here, our bodice, the front and the back, and we're going to match up the raw edges with our markings that we transferred. So you want to make sure that when you pin them, you don't twist them. I'm going to place the angled end of the strap along the back bodice piece at the marking that I transferred. So those markings are here, and I'm going to pin there. And the other side of the tie, I'm going to pin here along the front bodice between my markings that I transferred, and pin that in place. Okay, once you have your strap pinned on, you can go ahead and baste it in place. Now that the strap is basted in place, we can go ahead and grab our lining piece, and we're going to lay it right over top. And we are going to pin along the upper edge of the bodice here, not down at the bottom, just along the front and the upper edge. We're going to pin here. So go ahead and grab your pins. We're going to match up our seams and pin in place. Now that we have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you get up here to your markings, you want to make sure that you pivot across and then pivot and come back down. So let's go ahead and do our stitch now. Again, we're stitching at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have it sewn, I'm going to go ahead and trim my seam down to about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, now that we have it trimmed, we can go back to the sewing machine and we're going to do a little bit of understitching. So with understitching, you want to make sure that you have your seam allowance facing toward your lining pieces, and then we're going to do a really close stitch right here to our seam. So with the understitch, you want to make sure you have your seam allowance facing toward your lining, and on the right side you're just going to stitch really close to your seam. I'm going to be stitching at about 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to do understitching as far as we can go. You probably won't be able to get really close up here around the strap, but just understitch your pattern as far as you can go. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now that we have done our understitch and we've turned it to the inside, I've done my understitching on both of my front bodice pieces here. You want to baste the lower edges together, and then you also want to do 2 rows of gathering stitches between the notches. So go ahead and do those, and then we can move on to the next step. All right, now that we have done all the basting, we're going to take our 2 bodice pieces like so. You should have transferred a large circle right here near the lower edge. We need to tack this together, so you can get a needle and thread and put a tack right at the dot and then 1/4 of an inch below the dot. I'm going to pin mine in place, and I am going to tack mine together on my sewing machine. And really you just need to do a few zigzag stitches to tack it here. Again, I do recommend doing it by hand. I'm gonna do mine on the sewing machine. I'm gonna drop down my feed dogs as though I'm gonna do a button, and just go back and forth a few times right at the large circle, and then again 1/4 of an inch below inside the seam allowance. So let's go ahead and tack the bodice pieces together right here at our large circle. Okay, I've just placed 2 tacks into the front bodice pieces, one at the large circle and one 1/4 of an inch below. Once you have the tacks in, we can put this to the side and start to work on the midriff pieces. To begin working on our midriff pieces, that's pattern piece number 4 and 5. You want to go ahead and fuse interfacing to pattern piece number 5. You should have cut out 4 of those. So fuse interfacing to 2 and fuse interfacing to 1 of pattern piece number 4. These are my uninterfaced pieces, and I've just stitched them together along the side seam, and I've done the same thing for the ones that are interfaced. I'm going to start working on the one that is not interfaced first. Now you want to go ahead and grab your bodice pieces again, and with right sides facing, we're going to, first I'm going to lay my midriff piece on top, and we need to pull up on our gathering stitches so that everything matches up with our notches as well as our side seams. So I'm going to pin at my side seams first, and then I'll come back to adjust the gathers. So I'm going to grab some pins, and again with right sides facing, you want to make sure that the double notches are down here, so your facing piece should look like this. You should have the double notches down here at the bottom, and then you just lay that on top like so. So I'm going to start at my side seams, make sure that those seams are even. I'm going to pin in place there first. Okay, so now I can adjust my gathers so that they fit these 2 notches that's on the midriff. Okay, now that we have pinned our midriff to our bodice, it should look like this. You should have adjusted your gathers so that the notches match, as well as your side seams. In the back, you will have some that extends from the midriff, and that's totally fine. Just make sure that you're matching up your sides and your notches. Once you have that pinned in place, let's go ahead and baste it together. Okay, after we have our midriff pieces basted on, this is your time to check and make sure you don't have any folds or lumps, and that your center seams are matched up, and that everything is nice and clean before we do our permanent stitch. So go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to put this to the side and grab our other midriff pieces that we have fused with interfacing. So for these pieces, you want to stitch them the same way that you did the other pieces here. And then on our lower edge of the facing, which would be like this curved edge here, be sure that you are doing on the right edge. I actually did mine on the wrong edge and I had to go back and correct it. So what I've done is I just stitched along my seam line, 5/8 of an inch seam line, just to make it easier for me to press it up. That's totally optional. You can just transfer your marking, or you can just use a ruler and measure up 5/8 of an inch while you press it in place, but I just went ahead and did a stitch. I find that it's a lot easier. So this is the edge that you should be working on, not the edge that has the double notches up here, but the ones with just a single knot. After you have pressed up to 5/8 of an inch, then you want to trim it down to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, after you have trimmed it to 3/8 of an inch, now we can go ahead and attach it to the bodice. We are going to match up our notches, side seams, and pin it in place. So again, make sure that you have the right portion of your midriff going on top now, and make sure that you're working on the inside. So the right side of your midriff pieces are facing. Make sure that you have the wrong side of the bodice facing up. Go ahead and match up your side seams, your notches, and pin in place. After you have it pinned in place, now we can go to the sewing machine and we want to just stitch in our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, I have it stitched on here, and again, just double check to make sure that everything is smooth and clean. And now we can go back and trim down our seam, and we want to do understitching. Again, but understitching, make sure that your seam allowance is facing toward your facing piece, and just stitch really close to your seam, and then you can remove any gathering stitches that you see left behind. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, now that we have the understitching done, you want to go ahead and press it down like so. Now we can put this to the side and start to work on our skirt. The next step is to start working on our skirt front and back, which is pattern piece number 6 and pattern piece number 7. The first thing that you want to do is go ahead and stitch the side seams together. I've stitched mine here. And then you also want to do gathering along the upper edge of the skirt between the notches. So you should have transferred notches near the back pieces. You want to make sure that you start and stop your gathering stitches between there. I've used yarn to gather mine. You may prefer to use 2 rows of gathering stitches. If you do prefer to use that method, I do recommend gathering in sections as opposed to doing the whole thing. But by using yarn, it's a little bit more sturdy, so I can just do one long stitch of yarn and just pull it up. So that is what I've done here. I've gathered mine using yarn. So go ahead and stitch your front and back together along the sides. You can press your seams to one side or flat, and then apply your gathering stitches along the upper edge of the skirt. After you have your gathering rows onto the skirt, before we pull them up, first we're going to apply the tucks to our skirt section. So as you can see here, I've gone ahead and I've done one, and I have the other one marked out. So on the pattern tissue, you will see a stitching line and a fold line. And what I did first, which was wrong, I folded up along my fold line, but I folded it to the stitching line. So I only had a really tiny, I had like a 1/2 inch tuck. And I started stitching and I was like, wait, this looks a little bit smaller than what the model dress is showing. And so when I read the instructions again, it says to crease along the fold line and then stitch on the stitching line. So your tuck should be 1.5 inches. So I went ahead and transferred 3 markings, made it a little bit more easier for me. And that way I can pin through the stitching line like I'm pinning through a dart. So that's what we're gonna do here. I have my pin. I'm going to crease along the fold line and match up my stitching lines, okay? So I'm going to pin through one line, I'm going to come through the other line, I'm going to pin that in place. Now, if you have a fabric that presses well, my fabric presses okay. If yours presses well, then you can crease along your fold line and press it in place so that it's a hard press, and then you can just stitch right along your stitching line. But again, my fabric doesn't hold a press that great, so I'm just going to pin through the lines again as though I have dart legs and I want to make sure I'm going through the lines. So go ahead and do this for yours. Crease along the fold line and make sure that your tuck is 1.5 inches. And then pin it in place. Now that you have it pinned in place, we're going to go to the sewing machine, and you want to back stitch at the beginning and the end. You're just going to stitch right along your stitching line. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, I've just sewn in my remaining tuck that I had left. And so now that we have them both sewn on, if you want to go ahead and finish your back opening where we will be installing the zipper, you can go ahead and do that. And you also can tack down your tucks so that they just remain down, so you can baste those down if you like. So now we want to go ahead and grab our bodice piece, and we're going to gather up the top so that it matches the midriff. Let's do that now. We're only going to be attaching it to the unnotched midriff, so make sure that you have this open and you're not connecting them both. And again, with right sides facing, we're going to match up our side seams, match up our notches, match up our back notches as well. So go ahead and gather up the upper edge of the skirt, adjust the gathers so that everything meets and matches. All right, now that we have the skirt pinned to the midriff, you've adjusted your gathers and everything is evenly distributed, we can go to the sewing machine. We want to stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to stitch again a 1/4 of an inch away from that inside the seam allowance, just as a double stitch to really secure everything. So let's go ahead and stitch it in place now, and then we can press the seam going up toward the bodice. Now that we have sewn our skirt to the midriff, you can go ahead and trim down your seam. Next, after you have it trimmed, we can install our zipper. To install your invisible zipper, you will need a zipper foot. This is a standard regular zipper foot, and this here is an invisible zipper foot. I'm going to be installing it using this foot in this video. I'm going to pin my zipper in place here, and you want to make sure that the zipper stop is a 1/4 of an inch down from the top, because keep in mind we are going to have to fold this over to close it, and this is the facing, so you don't want it to be all the way up here at the top. You just want it on the midriff that's not interfaced. And now we're just going to pin it in place, and then we're going to pin it in place, making sure the zipper teeth is lined up with our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you get to your circle, make sure that you stop pinning there, and now we can go ahead and stitch this in place. Now, if you're going to be using a regular zipper foot, I do recommend basting this in place first, and after you have it basted, then you can go back and stitch it, and while you're stitching it, you can pull coils to the side so that way you can stitch as close as you can. If you have an invisible zipper foot, we can go to the machine and we could just put the coil right here in the groove and just stitch it down now. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and pop it on. I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to stitch straight down to the circle, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Make sure that you match up your seams when you are placing your other zipper tape down. Let's go ahead and install it now. Now that we have this side of the zipper tape installed, we can go ahead and pin the other side in place. When you have an invisible zipper foot, it makes it a little bit easier to just stitch it because it has the grooves at the bottom. So it pushes over and it gets close to it without you having to spread it with your finger. But again, if you don't have that foot, you can just use a regular zipper foot. I'm gonna go ahead and pin the other tape to the other side here. And then I'm gonna be sure to make sure I match up my seam right here so that everything is even when I'm done sewing. So let's go ahead and pin this in place and stitch it the same way. Okay, now that we have our zipper installed, and again, make sure that you're using a zipper that's coordinating to your fabric. After we have it installed, now we're going to stitch the remaining seam. So you want to go ahead and put your fabric right sides facing, again, below the zipper. If you do have a zipper that's longer than what's required, you can just hand tack a new zipper stop. So just go around the zipper coils, tie that off, and then trim it. So again, with right sides facing, you want to go ahead and pin and make sure that you're matching up your tucks. You want everything to be even in the back. And once you have it pinned up here, we're going to go to the sewing machine. We're going to begin stitching to the left of our stitch. So we're going to start about 1/4 of an inch up to the left past where we stopped. So I stopped here. I'm going to come to the left by like 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to go up about 1/4 of an inch and just start stitching there, and then continue stitching down the remaining of my seam. Okay, I've gone ahead and stitched the remaining seam at the center back together, and I pressed my seam open. So this is what that seam is looking like now. So if your zipper is longer, you can go ahead and trim off the excess from your zipper. And now we can go ahead and close up the facing along the zipper tape. And from here, you can either stitch this portion down along the zipper tape. Make sure that you keep the bottom edge of it folded up for when we slip stitch it closed along the inside here. So if you want, you can fold over and stitch along the zipper tape to secure that, or you can just go ahead and fold it to the inside like so. Fold down your midriff over, and then you can just begin your slip stitching here, as well as on the bottom edge, you want to slip stitch over your seam. So this is what it will look like as you begin and finish your slip stitching. You can do a stitch in the ditch right here in your seam. Just make sure that you pin past your seam so that when you're stitching on the right side, you'll be able to catch the folded edge. So again, let's go ahead and close up our midriff by either slip stitching it closed, or you can stitch in the ditch or stitch down the zipper tape. So let's go ahead and finish that now. Okay, so I stitched down the edge of my zipper tape here. So this is stitched. I did it for this side as well. I have it stitched, and I have pinned mine with the pins on the outside so I could do a stitch in the ditch. So I'm going to begin stitching here and go all the way around, making sure that I catch the folded edge here on the inside. So go ahead and close up your midriff, whether you're going to slip stitch it or stitch in the ditch. Let's go ahead and do it now. Once you have your midriff sewn on, the last thing for us to do is to start to work on the lower skirt front and back. So here's my lower skirt front and back, and I've actually gone ahead and done mine. So you're gonna do this the same exact way that we did for the other skirt in front. You want to sew the side seams together. You want to create your tucks by transferring those markings. Here are my tucks here. So you want to transfer your tucks, and then you want to put gathering at the top edge of it. So once you have that complete, then you can go ahead and attach it to the lower edge of your dress, matching up your notches as well as your side seams. So with right sides facing, I'm going to begin pinning in place and pulling up my gathers, making sure that I match up my center back seam as well as my side seams, and just pull up everything and pin it in place. Okay, I have pulled up my gathers so that everything fits, and I pinned it in place. I've matched up my center back seam, my side seams, as well as my notches. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch it in place. Make sure when you're stitching that you have the gathers facing up, that way you can make adjustments if you need to. So let's go ahead and stitch this in place now, and I'm going to finish off mine with my serger. Okay, I have my gathers sewn. I'm going to go ahead and remove my yarn, and then I'm going to finish off the edges of my seam. Here's a look at the gathers, really cute. Okay, I'm gonna go to the serger now and finish off that seam. Okay, once you have that seam finished, the last thing for us to do is a narrow hem along the lower edge. So you wanna go ahead and fold up 5/8 of an inch and then fold in 1/4 of an inch to meet that fold. Fold it over again and then stitch it close to the inner fold. So go ahead and do your 5/8 of an inch narrow hem along your lower edge and you are all done with this dress. Well, that is all for the sew along, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. If you are new to sewing or you need a refresher, be sure to check out sewitacademy.com. Be sure to like the video, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Blessings, everyone. Bye.